Explanation. Winnowing fork equals throw shovel. Shovel for winnowing the grain. With the winnowing fork, the grain threshed with a flail was thrown against the wind so as to separate the lighter chaff from the heavier grains. 25. The lie can never withstand the truth, which destroys evil in its fire. (26) As Johannes, the initiator, the one who carries out the initiation, thus spoke, behold, then came Emmanuel from Galilee to the bank of the Jordan to Johannes the initiator, to be introduced into the initiation by him. 27. Johannes, however, refused him and spoke, it is I who need to receive the initiation from you, because you are more knowing than I, and you come to me? 28. But Emmanuel answered him and said, let it happen so now, because it is fitting for us to fulfill all fairness, since we are both sons of the earth. 29. So Johannes, the initiator, the one who carries out the initiation, consented and introduced him into the initiation. 30. When Emmanuel had received the initiation, he soon left Johannes, the initiator, the one who carries out the initiation, and the bank of the Jordan. And behold, a brazenly, metallically shimmering, singing, whirring light extraterrestrial beam ship of the Pleiaren fell from the firmament and flew over the Jordan. 31. Consequently, they all fell on their faces and pressed them into the sand, while a voice from the brazen metallic light extraterrestrial beam ship of the Pleiaren spoke. 32. This is my beloved Son, who gives me pleasure. He will be the King of truth and wisdom, by which every terrestrial human species will be knowing, if they will turn to the teaching of truth. 33. Behold, after these words, Emmanuel entered into the brazen metallic light extraterrestrial beam ship of the Pleiaren, which climbed into the firmament, surrounded by fire and smoke, and flew away over the lifeless sea, Dead Sea. So thus the singing, whirring of the brazen metallic light soon faded away. 34. After that, Emmanuel was no longer seen for 40 days and 40 nights. Explanation 1. Johannes the initiator, the one who carries out the initiation, was not the same age as Emmanuel, but he was already 48 years old when Emmanuel visited him on the bank of the Jordan near the Dead Sea. Johannes had been taught by old wise ones who were still knowledgeable of the teaching of the prophets, that is, the teaching of the truth, teaching of the Spirit, or teaching of the creation energy, teaching of life. His spirit form was the reincarnation of Elisha, who was called by the prophet Elijah to be his disciple. 3. The initiation was carried out in accordance with, quote, the old laws of the Ishwish, in connection with the old teaching, and in accordance with the traditional custom. So, in accordance with the, quote, teaching of the prophets, that is, the teaching of truth, teaching of creation energy, teaching of life. At the same time, this was not a symbolic act of cleansing, but was an initiation in the form of a traditional ritual without anything belief-based, but rather with a knowledge-based and wisdom-based background in relation to the teaching of the prophets, or the teaching of truth, teaching of spirit, teaching of life. The ritual at that time was an initiation, but not in the form of an immersion into water, but rather into the fire knowledge of the truth. 4. Unfortunately, from the initiation of Emmanuel carried out by Johannes, the initiator, An act of the dissolution of original sin and an act of the driving out of evil spirits was made by the rising Christianity, and from all that followed this. And this act was Christian baptism, as finds misused application up to the present time. The reason for this is the irrational belief, as well as the maintaining of the cult, that is, the might of Christianity, and the maintaining of the fear of the believers before God, as well as before the evil. 5. Jmmanuel underwent the initiation by Johannes because this was a traditional custom of the knowing ones and wise ones in relation to the teaching of the prophets, or the teaching of truth, teaching of spirit, teaching of life. There was nothing to it that would attract the attention of the people, which consisted merely of a small group of a few people and not of a large number of people, as is wrongly claimed in the New Testament. At that time, there were still only few human beings who populated the cities and villages. So, if, for example, numbers of 5,000 persons are mentioned in the New Testament or in the Bible, then these correspond to huge illusions and falsifications of the truth, because truthfully, it was then at such numbers as 25 to 50 at most, or in the best case, 200 to 250 persons. As for example, with the Sermon on the Mount, but these then departed and went their way. Or in the case of the slaughter of the priests of Baal, there were 22 of these servants of Baal, and therefore not 450, who were ultimately killed in pure self-defense because they went forth against the prophet, armed and wanted to murder him. So he got seriously injured and barely escaped with his life. Also to be said to this is that the prophet himself did not kill the priests of Baal, as is claimed in the Bible. Rather, the infuriated followers of the prophet who wanted to protect his life accomplished the act. 6. Jmmanuel was taken away by a singing light with fire and smoke, extraterrestrial beamship of the Pleiadian, because the flying object was such that it still functioned with fire and smoke, exhaust gases and exhaust fire, when starting from the ground, namely with a rocket propulsion. Thus, there was no intention behind it to thereby attract attention among the people. 7. Jmmanuel had only a small crowd of followers, that is, his closest, like-minded companions, 12 disciples and 17 discipluses, who accompanied him from time to time, and, depending on opportunity, wherever he went, and so even on his fateful course to Jerusalem. The many people who supposedly listened to him and accompanied him, as is erroneously written in the New Testament, in many cases, were so exaggerated in number by his disciples and discipluses, as well as by the Christian irrational teaching, that from a few human beings present, large masses were made. This is the case, for example, as already mentioned, with the Sermon on the Mount, where first there were only about 250 persons present, who came from afar and wide, but who then soon removed themselves. So in the end, there were only around 50 of these people. Just an audience of 250 human beings was very enormous for that time. For at that time, Israel was still very sparsely populated, and audiences had to gather together from far and wide in order to ensure such a high number of listeners. And those who accompanied Jmmanuel were only just a few of his like-minded disciples and discipluses, and their numbers with regard to the accompaniment changed continuously. So sometimes 2 of these, only 1, or several of these followers were with him. In the case of the last time, only 9 of the discipluses and disciples were together with Emmanuel when he was arrested by the henchmen in the garden of Gethsemane. Okay, that's it for today. Thank you. Salome.